Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today we're going to be looking at one of our favorite fishes in the fish room, and that's the clown loach. It's a relatively common fish, and it's something I think a lot of people enjoy. So we're going to talk about how to care for them, so stay tuned. All right, so what we're looking at here is a clown loach, Botia macrocantha. This is one of a few that we have in this tank, and before we go any further, these fish should be kept in relatively large groups. I don't have enough in this group, and I will be working on that. So now, this fish generally comes from Indonesia, where the water is clean and clear and has a relatively high flow, and that's what a lot of people try to replicate. pH is right around neutral, maybe slightly acidic. The fish that you're looking at is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6 inches or so, and is about maybe 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old. These fish can grow pretty large. They can get up to a foot long in captivity, maybe slightly larger, and when they do get that long, they also get very tall and kind of bulky, so it's a big fish once they reach full size. Now you see the color here is kind of muted, and that's normal. And so what we usually see with clown loaches when we see them in a store, they're really colorful. The orange is really orange, the tails are really red, the black is really nice and deep, and then over time that starts to get washed out and you start to see more of this color. And it really is almost independent of the types of substrate you put them on. They're still going to lose their color to a certain extent and become a little bit more muddied as they get older. So one of the interesting things about this fish is that they do actually change color depending on their mood, and they can really darken up if they're stressed out. So if you ever see that where your clown loach looks almost black, there's something wrong. Usually if it's a tank mate or maybe you startled them, they can get a little bit darker in a short period of time and then change back to this once they feel more comfortable. The other interesting thing is one of their protective features is they have little spikes under their eyes, and if you have to be careful if you were to catch these fish out of an aquarium or try to grab them with your hands. That might not be the best idea because they are very sharp, and that is to protect them from predation in nature. Now their temperament, I think one of the reasons why these fish are so popular is because they have such an awesome temperament. They're kind of goofy. They are boisterous. They're aggressive when it comes time to eat, and they're out and about. And I've seen these fish kind of play around with other fish and sort of harass them, not necessarily in a dominating sort of way, just because they are curious fish. And you can see them kind of digging through the gravel looking for snacks. Now, because they get relatively large, because they are relatively boisterous, in terms of their tank mates, I've kept these with a lot of different fish. And you can see in this 150-gallon tank, I've got severums, I've got geophagus, acaras, tinfoil barbs, there's gouramis in here, bristlenose. You see a silver dollar starting to make his way in there, bala sharks. So lots of different type of fish. I would say I have had success with almost every mildly mannered South American cichlid you could think of. I just named a bunch, like the geophagus and the severums and the acaras. Does perfectly fine with them. In pretty much every tank you'd see, you even see a frontosa in there, and they've been working out pretty well. Barbs, tetras. I've had them in with angelfish. In fact, there's an angelfish in this tank. Bristlenose, plecos, cory cats. The one thing I would say when it comes to tank mates is you might want to exercise a little bit of caution if you're going to put other types of loaches in the tank, just because they may be a little bit harassed by these fish from time to time. Sometimes it works out fine. In fact, in this tank, I've got a couple other smaller botias in this tank that are not clown loaches, and they just ignore them. Maybe it's because the tank is large, but when I've had these fish in a smaller tank, like a 75-gallon, sometimes they'll pay a little bit more attention to those other botia types of fish. So in terms of temperature, the tank that you're looking at here is right around 77, 78. That's probably on the lower side of the temperature spectrum. These fish do really awesome at 80 to 82. pH, usually right around neutral, but again, our pH is a little bit higher. Our pH is closer to 8, but it doesn't seem to affect these fish a whole lot, at least the ones that we've had, and that could be because they have been acclimated to that pH over time, but we're right around 7, 8, or an 8, and they're doing okay. Now, in terms of the lighting, this tank is actually probably a little bit too bright, and sometimes what happens is, believe it or not, I just clean the algae off the lids on the top of the tank, so that brightens things up. But often there's a little bit of algae growth on the glass lids, and that kind of brings the lighting down a little bit, and I think clown loaches would appreciate that slightly subdued light. They tend to be a little bit more active when it's not quite so bright. Water hardness, our total dissolved solids is right around 200, so it's a little bit on the harder side of the water spectrum, and again, we've had absolutely no issues. You are definitely going to want to keep water quality very high with these fish. This is absolutely not a fish for a brand new uncycled fish tank. If you're going to get ammonia spikes and nitrite spikes, I can almost guarantee you this is the fish out of all the fish in your tank that's probably going to feel that first. So make sure your tank is well cycled. It's gone through the nitrogen cycle. Even with nitrates, again, we try to keep them relatively low, somewhere in that 20-25 parts per million range. But when water quality is an issue, like I said, these fish are usually one of the first to show signs of stress. Now, in terms of food, they are relatively non-picky. At least ours have eaten just about everything. Flakes, sinking pellets, love bloodworms. They'll go crazy for some frozen bloodworms, frozen brine shrimp. They will eat, even our clown loaches will come to the top of the tank and eat the freeze-dried krill that we put in for the tinfoil barbs. One of the really cool things is if you have a snail problem in one of your tanks, these clown loaches will usually take care of that in a very short order. As some of you know who've watched our channel, we have snails in a lot of our tanks, be it ram's horn snails or your common pond snails. And when they get a little out of control in some of our tanks, what we'll do is we'll net up, a half a net full of snails and dump them in this tank. And between the clown loaches, the acara, and the tinfoil barbs, they just absolutely devour them. They love having the snails for a snack. They also eat vegetables. They'll eat cucumbers. Sometimes people will feed them fruit like watermelon and bananas. Although, be careful with your fruits and vegetables. Make sure they don't have any pesticides on them. Wash them well. Clown loaches also like the rapashi foods, kind of the gel-based foods. We'll throw that in the bottom, and they will eat that as well. So they're really not picky eaters at all. Now, tank size. This is where things get a little bit interesting. And again, this is a fish I don't really recommend for beginners because it takes a little bit of experience and in a well-established tank. But tank size, minimum, in my opinion, would be a 75-gallon tank. You're looking at a fish that can get a foot long. The big problem here is not necessarily an individual fish. It's the fact that these fish really prefer to be kept in large numbers, and the larger the better. Again, I've got 3. That's not enough, and I'm going to have to add to that colony, and I'm going to be doing that relatively soon. But 5, 6, 7, you really start to see their personalities. But when you think about it, 5, 6, 7 fish that can get as large as these fish can get, even a 75 gallon is not going to be enough. This is a 150 gallon that we're looking at here. I would say a bare minimum long term is a 125. Again, the bigger the tank, the better off you're going to be because you're going to want to keep them in a decent number. At least a half a dozen or so would be best, if not more. Now, you could see here we've got lots of hiding places, caves, and that's why you don't see the other clown loaches right now. And they really appreciate that. They really appreciate a place where they can go and just kind of be out of the light and out of the action. And so any tank you set up for them, give them a place to rest, whether that's driftwood and plants or caves or rock work, something where they can feel comfortable if they don't want to be out with everybody else. For large planted tanks, sometimes people will use various types of loaches to deal with snail problems. Be a little bit careful. As you can see, this clown loach is kind of going through the substrate, and they like to do that, and they'll go through sand, and sometimes they'll kind of nose their way through plant roots and get under certain hardscaping decorations and things. So some plants, they might get uprooted from time to time, but they generally don't eat them or anything. Now, breeding. It's really hard to breed these fish. In fact, unless you've got you're going to be injecting them full of hormones, it's probably not going to happen in the home aquarium. So most of these fish are wild caught, and again, breeding them is just not something that's easy to do, so we're not really going to talk much about that. So I would say overall positive aspects of clown loaches. They've got a great personality. They're goofy fish. If they're comfortable in their surroundings, they're going to be out and they're going to be interacting with one another. They do have nice color when they're young, and they still are nice looking fish as they get older. Of course, some of that color is going to fade a little bit. And they're relatively easy to keep in a well-established large tank. But there are significant challenges, and I think these are the most important points. Is one, you do want to keep them in relatively large groups. So that's going to limit the availability in terms of being able to keep them in smaller setups. 55s and under, 75 and under is really not going to be a very good long-term option. The other thing is watch out for ick. These fish, more than any fish that I've had experience with, are subject to ick very easily. So poor water quality if they have been shipped. Most of the time after shipment they're going to be stressed, and they're sensitive to cooler water temperatures. And I would say if you're going to a pet store and looking for clown loaches, really study that tank. Study to see if there are any white spots on that fish, if the fins are clamped at all, if they're acting in a weird way. You just have to be careful, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend quarantine clown loaches before you put them in your established tank, because even if they don't show signs of ick when you pick them up, just the fact of getting them in a bag, taking them home from a pet store, putting them in new surroundings, they get stressed, and when they get stressed, they get sick. So I would quarantine these fish for, and I've got a quarantine video out that you should probably look at if you haven't already. Quarantine these fish for 4 weeks. I know it's extreme, but you're going to wind up saving a lot of heartache and a lot of problems in the long run if you make sure these fish are healthy before you put them in a well-established tank. Now, other things. If you keep them in a small group, as I have right now, they sometimes tend to hide. So that can be an issue. Also, the most dominant clown loach will sometimes be a little bit boisterous and possibly harass some of the other clown loaches if they're in a smaller group, and so the larger the group, the less that's going to be a problem. Now, again, I've already mentioned with other botillas, just kind of watch and make sure that the other botillas are not harassing the clown loaches are not harassing them, because that can happen. In fact, these clown loaches used to be in a 75-gallon, and we had some other loach type fish that were harassing them a little bit, and clown loaches will stay in a hide until they starve to death. So once they get spooked, and if that threat is constantly there, they're probably not going to come out of their hiding location. And if it's a fish that's even like them active at night or can be active at night, they will stay there until they starve. So we really have to be careful about the types of fish that we include in our setups when we're housing clown loaches. One last thing I want to mention is if these fish do get sick, another challenge is actually treating the sickness, especially if it's ick. They can be sensitive to copper-based medications, which tend to be, in my opinion, some of the most effective treatments for ick, but you have to be really careful when you're treating these fish for whether it's ick or velvet or whatever, that the medication doesn't kill them before the actual parasite does. All right, everyone, so that was the clown loach. It's a great fish. I wish we had more. At some point, we're probably going to get some more. So if you like this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.